What if I told you that one of the most iconic figures in history, Moses, had a hidden story? A story not about him, but about the people closest to him, his own sons. You've heard about the burning bush, the 10 plagues, and the parting of the Red Sea. But what about Gershom and Eleazar? Their names may not echo through history like their fathers, but their lives hold secrets that could change how you see legacy, purpose, and service. Imagine this. Moses, the man chosen by God to lead an entire nation out of slavery, had 2 sons who lived quietly in his shadow. They weren't at the forefront of the Exodus. They didn't perform miracles or stand before Pharaoh. Yet, their existence and their absence from the spotlight raises profound questions. Why were they overlooked? What was their role in one of the greatest stories ever told? And what can we learn from their quiet contribution to a divine mission? Today, we're diving deep into the untold story of Moses' sons. It's a tale of humility, faithfulness, and the power of serving behind the scenes. By the end of this video, you'll see that even those who seem to play minor roles can leave a lasting impact. So, are you ready to uncover the mystery? Let's begin. The story of Moses is one of the most captivating narratives in human history. From the burning bush to the parting of the Red Sea, his life has inspired countless generations. Yet, amidst the grandeur of plagues, miracles, and divine encounters, there lies a quieter, often overlooked chapter: his family. Specifically, the story of his sons, Gershom and Eleazar. While their names may not resonate as loudly as those of biblical giants like Aaron or Joshua, they hold a profound significance that deserves our attention. Their lives remind us that even in the shadow of towering figures, there are lessons waiting to be uncovered. Lessons about purpose, humility, and the quiet strength of serving faithfully. Moses' journey was anything but ordinary. He began as a prince of Egypt, raised in luxury, only to flee into the desert after killing an Egyptian taskmaster. It was during this time of exile, in the land of Midian, that Moses started a new chapter of his life, one that included marriage and fatherhood. His wife, Zipporah, bore him 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. These boys were born far from the opulence of Egypt, in a humble setting that shaped their early years. But what makes their story so intriguing is not just their existence, but the deeper symbolism behind their names and the roles they played, or didn't play, in one of history's greatest sagas. Gershom, the firstborn, was named to reflect Moses' sense of displacement. The name Gershom means a stranger there, capturing the essence of Moses' life as a fugitive, a man torn from his roots and thrust into unfamiliar territory. Imagine the weight of that name, carrying within it the story of survival, adaptation, and resilience. Then came Eleazar, whose name means God has helped. This second son symbolized hope and divine providence, a reminder that even in the wilderness, God's presence was unwavering. Together, these names paint a picture of Moses' journey, a man who had lost everything, yet found solace in faith and family. But here's where the mystery deepens. Despite being Moses' own flesh and blood, Gershom and Eleazar remain largely absent from the Exodus narrative. They don't stand beside their father as he confronts Pharaoh. They aren't mentioned as leaders among the Israelites. Instead, they fade into the background, overshadowed by the monumental events unfolding around them. Why is this? Was it simply a matter of divine design, or does their absence teach us something about the nature of service and legacy? To understand their role, or lack thereof, we must consider the broader context of Moses' mission. God chose Moses for a unique purpose, to lead an entire nation out of bondage and into freedom. This was no ordinary task. It required someone willing to step into the limelight, to face unimaginable challenges, and to become a vessel for God's power. In contrast, Gershom and Eleazar seemed to embody a different kind of calling, one rooted in support rather than leadership. Their lives remind us that not everyone is called to lead armies or perform miracles. Sometimes, the most vital contributions are made quietly, behind the scenes, shaping the world in ways we might not immediately recognize. This brings us to a thought-provoking question. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? Is it defined by the recognition we receive, or by the faithfulness with which we fulfill our roles? Gershom and Eleazar's story challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about success and significance. Perhaps their legacy isn't measured by the pages they occupy in Scripture, but by the enduring impact of their quiet devotion or perform miracles, yet their lives were part of God's greater plan. Their descendants became integral to the spiritual fabric of Israel, reminding us that even small, unnoticed acts can ripple through generations. This makes me wonder, are we willing to embrace roles that may seem ordinary, but are vital to something much bigger than ourselves? The key takeaway from this exploration is clear. Faithfulness, humility, and obedience matter more than status or recognition. Our worth isn't determined by how many people know our name, but by how well we fulfill the purpose entrusted to us. Whether in our families, communities, or workplaces, every act of service contributes to a larger story. So, I challenge you today. Take a moment to reflect on your own role. Are you embracing it with gratitude and dedication? Dive deeper into stories like these. Question assumptions, spark conversations, and seek inspiration in unexpected places. Let's commit to valuing faithfulness over fame, knowing that even the quietest contributions can leave an enduring legacy. As we delve deeper into their story, let us keep this question in mind. How can we find purpose, even when our roles seem small or unnoticed? Because in the end, every life matters, not because of the noise it makes, but because of the love, faithfulness, and service it embodies. To truly understand the lives of Gershom and Eleazar, we must first journey back to the moment of their birth, a time when Moses was not yet the great leader we know from the Exodus story. Picture this: a man who had once walked the halls of Pharaoh's palace, now living as a shepherd in the rugged wilderness of Midian. This was Moses after his dramatic escape from Egypt, a fugitive running from the consequences of his own actions. He had killed an Egyptian taskmaster for beating a Hebrew slave, an act that forced him to abandon everything he had ever known. Alone and adrift, Moses found refuge in Midian, where he met Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a priest of Midian. It was here, in this humble and unexpected setting, that Moses began to build a new life and a family. Gershom, the firstborn, entered the world during a season of uncertainty and transition. His name carries a weight that reflects Moses' inner turmoil at the time. Gershom means a stranger there, a poignant reminder of Moses' sense of displacement. Imagine Moses holding his newborn son for the first time, gazing into the face of this tiny miracle and feeling the full weight of his circumstances. He was no longer a prince of Egypt, nor was he yet the deliverer of Israel. He was simply a man trying to survive, a foreigner in a land that was not his own. Gershom's name became a testament to this chapter of Moses' life, a chapter marked by loss, humility, and the search for belonging. Yet, even in the midst of hardship, there was hope. The birth of Gershom was a sign that life goes on, that new beginnings are possible, even in the most unlikely places. Years later, Eleazar was born, bringing with him a message of divine faithfulness. His name means God has helped, and it speaks volumes about the shift in Moses' perspective. By this time, Moses had settled into his role as a shepherd and a husband. He had found a measure of peace in Midian, far removed from the chaos of Egypt. Eleazar's arrival signaled a turning point, a recognition that God had been present through every trial, guiding Moses' steps even when the path seemed unclear. Together, the names of these two sons tell a story of transformation. From being a stranger in a strange land to experiencing the unwavering help of God, Moses' journey was one of profound spiritual growth. But what about the boys themselves? What was life like for Gershom and Eleazar growing up in Midian? They were raised in a modest household, surrounded by the simplicity of desert life. Their days would have been filled with the sights and sounds of the wilderness, the bleating of sheep, the rustling of dry grass, and the vast expanse of open sky. Unlike their father, who had once dined in the opulence of Pharaoh's court, they knew only the quiet rhythms of pastoral existence. And yet, there was something beautiful about their upbringing. It was unpretentious, grounded, and deeply connected to the natural world. In many ways, their childhood mirrored the humility that would later define their roles in the larger biblical narrative. It's worth noting that Gershom and Eleazar grew up without the privileges or pressures that might have come with being the sons of a future prophet and leader. At this stage in Moses' life, he was still a shepherd, an ordinary man trying to provide for his family. There was no indication that he would one day stand before Pharaoh, part the Red Sea, or lead millions of people to freedom. For Gershom and Eleazar, their father was simply Moses, a loving parent who worked hard to care for them. This adds another layer of poignancy to their story. They were shaped by the same hands that would later hold the Ten Commandments, yet they remained untouched by the fame and responsibility that awaited their father. As we reflect on their early years, it becomes clear that Gershom and Eleazar were products of their environment, children of the wilderness, shaped by its challenges and blessings. But their story doesn't end here. While their childhood may have been ordinary, the choices they made and the legacy they left behind would prove to be anything but. Their lives remind us that greatness isn't always defined by the roles we play, but by the faithfulness with which we live. And so, as we continue to explore their journey, let us keep asking ourselves, what does it mean to serve faithfully, even when the world isn't watching? Because in the quiet moments of obedience, we often find the seeds of something extraordinary. To truly understand the lives of Gershom and Eleazar, we must first journey back to the moment of their birth, a time when Moses was not yet the great leader we know from the Exodus story. Picture this: a man who had once walked the halls of Pharaoh's palace, now living as a shepherd in the rugged wilderness of Midian. This was Moses after his dramatic escape from Egypt, a fugitive running from the consequences of his own actions. He had killed an Egyptian taskmaster for beating a Hebrew slave, an act that forced him to abandon everything he had ever known. Alone and adrift, Moses found refuge in Midian, where he met Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a priest of Midian. It was here, in this humble and unexpected setting, that Moses began to build a new life and a family. Gershom, the firstborn, entered the world during a season of uncertainty and transition. His name carries a weight that reflects Moses' inner turmoil at the time. Gershom means a stranger there, a poignant reminder of Moses' sense of displacement. Imagine Moses holding his newborn son for the first time, gazing into the face of this tiny miracle, and feeling the full weight of his circumstances. He was no longer a prince of Egypt, nor was he yet the deliverer of Israel. He was simply a man trying to survive, a foreigner in a land that was not his own. Gershom's name became a testament to this chapter of Moses' life, a chapter marked by loss, humility, and the search for belonging. Yet, even in the midst of hardship, there was hope. The birth of Gershom was a sign that life goes on, that new beginnings are possible, even in the most unlikely places. Years later, Eliezer was born, bringing with him a message of divine faithfulness. His name means, "God has helped," and it speaks volumes about the shift in Moses' perspective. By this time, Moses had settled into his role as a shepherd and a husband. He had found a measure of peace in Midian, far removed from the chaos of Egypt. Eliezer's arrival signaled a turning point, a recognition that God had been present through every trial, guiding Moses' steps even when the path seemed unclear. Together, the names of these two sons tell a story of transformation. From being a stranger in a strange land to experiencing the unwavering help of God, Moses' journey was one of profound spiritual growth. But what about the boys themselves? What was life like for Gershom and Eliezer growing up in Midian? They were raised in a modest household, surrounded by the simplicity of desert life. Their days would have been filled with the sights and sounds of the wilderness, the bleating of sheep, the rustling of dry grass, and the vast expanse of open sky. Unlike their father, who had once dined in the opulence of Pharaoh's court, they knew only the quiet rhythms of pastoral existence. And yet, there was something beautiful about their upbringing. It was unpretentious, grounded, and deeply connected to the natural world. In many ways, their childhood mirrored the humility that would later define their roles in the larger biblical narrative. It's worth noting that Gershom and Eliezer grew up without the privileges or pressures that might have come with being the sons of a future prophet and leader. At this stage in Moses' life, he was still a shepherd, an ordinary man, trying to provide for his family. There was no indication that he would one day stand before Pharaoh, part the Red Sea, or lead millions of people to freedom. For Gershom and Eliezer, their father was simply Moses, a loving parent who worked hard to care for them. This adds another layer of poignancy to their story. They were shaped by the same hands that would later hold the Ten Commandments, yet they remained untouched by the fame and responsibility that awaited their father. As we reflect on their early years, it becomes clear that Gershom and Eliezer were products of their environment, children of the wilderness, shaped by its challenges and blessings. But their story doesn't end here. While their childhood may have been ordinary, the choices they made and the legacy they left behind would prove to be anything but. Their lives remind us that greatness isn't always defined by the roles we play, but by the faithfulness with which we live. And so, as we continue to explore their journey, let us keep asking ourselves, what does it mean to serve faithfully, even when the world isn't watching? Because in the quiet moments of obedience, we often find the seeds of something extraordinary. As we delve deeper into the lives of Gershom and Eliezer, one question looms large. What role did they play in Moses' monumental mission to free the Israelites from slavery? To answer this, we must first consider the broader context of their father's journey. Moses was not just a man, he was a vessel chosen by God for an extraordinary purpose. His life was marked by divine encounters, miraculous signs, and unimaginable challenges. Yet, amidst all the chaos and grandeur of the Exodus, Gershom and Eleazar seem almost invisible. Their absence from the forefront of the narrative raises profound questions about legacy, service, and the different ways people contribute to a greater mission. To understand their place, or lack thereof, in the Exodus story, we need to examine the nature of Moses' calling. When God appeared to Moses in the burning bush, he gave him a task that would change the course of history: to confront Pharaoh, demand the release of the Israelites, and lead them to the promised land. This was no ordinary assignment. It required courage, resilience, and an unwavering trust in God's power. Moses, despite his initial reluctance, stepped into this role with determination. But what about his family? Where were Gershom and Eleazar during these pivotal moments? The truth is, Moses' sons were physically present, but spiritually and narratively distant. They accompanied their father as he embarked on his mission, yet they played no active role in the events that unfolded. There are no accounts of Gershom or Eleazar standing beside Moses as he faced Pharaoh, no stories of them helping to organize the Israelites, and no mention of them participating in the miracles that defined the Exodus. Instead, they remained in the background, overshadowed by the magnitude of their father's work. This isn't to say they were unimportant. Far from it. Their presence reminds us that even those who aren't at the center of the action can still be part of something far greater than themselves. But why were Gershom and Eleazar relegated to such a secondary role? Was it simply a matter of divine design, or does their absence carry a deeper message? One possible explanation lies in the distinction between leadership and support. Moses was called to lead, to stand before kings, and to command armies. His role demanded visibility, authority, and a willingness to bear the weight of an entire nation's hopes and fears. Gershom and Eleazar, on the other hand, were not burdened with such responsibilities. Their roles, though less prominent, were no less significant. They represented the quiet strength of those who serve faithfully without seeking recognition. In many ways, their lives embody the principle that not everyone is called to lead, but everyone is called to serve. This dynamic becomes even more apparent when we compare Moses' sons to Aaron's descendants. Aaron, Moses' brother, was chosen by God to establish the priesthood, a lineage that would carry immense spiritual authority for generations to come. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, and later Eleazar, Aaron's son, not to be confused with Moses' son, took on leadership roles within the priestly system. They performed sacrifices, maintained the tabernacle, and served as intermediaries between God and the people. In contrast, Moses' sons had no such responsibilities. Their legacy was tied not to leadership or ritual, but to humility and faithfulness. What can we learn from this contrast? First, it teaches us that God assigns different roles to different people based on His purposes. Not everyone is meant to be a leader, and that's perfectly okay. Some are called to serve quietly, to support others, and to contribute in ways that may never be seen or celebrated. Gershom and Eleazar's lives remind us that greatness isn't measured by titles or positions, but by the sincerity with which we fulfill our calling. Second, their story challenges us to redefine success. In a world that often equates achievement with visibility, their example encourages us to value faithfulness over fame, humility over status, and service over recognition. Finally, let us not overlook the emotional weight of their situation. Imagine being the child of someone as extraordinary as Moses. Imagine growing up knowing that your father was chosen by God to perform miracles and lead millions to freedom. For Gershom and Eleazar, this reality must have been both inspiring and daunting. Did they ever feel overshadowed by their father's legacy? Did they struggle with feelings of inadequacy or insignificance? While Scripture doesn't provide explicit answers, we can infer that their lives were shaped by a profound sense of humility. They didn't try to compete with their father's greatness. Instead, they embraced their own unique roles, however small they may have seemed. In reflecting on Gershom and Eleazar's contribution to the Exodus, we are reminded of an important truth. Every person has a part to play in God's story. Whether we are leading nations or serving quietly behind the scenes, our faithfulness matters. And sometimes, the most enduring legacies are those that are built not through grand gestures, but through steadfast devotion. As we continue to explore their story, let us ask ourselves, are we willing to serve faithfully, even when our efforts go unnoticed? Because in the end, it is not the size of our role that defines us. It is the love and integrity with which we fulfill it. One of the most pivotal and dramatic moments in Moses' life, and one that directly involved his family, was the circumcision incident. This event, though brief in its description in the Bible, carries profound implications about obedience, covenant, and the weight of divine expectations. It is a moment that not only reveals the seriousness of God's commands, but also sheds light on the role of Moses' wife, Zipporah, and by extension, their sons, Gershom and Eleazar, in this critical chapter of their family's story. The scene unfolds as Moses is en route to Egypt, tasked with confronting Pharaoh and demanding the release of the Israelites. At this point, Moses had already encountered God at the burning bush and received clear instructions for his mission. Yet, despite the magnitude of his calling, there was an unresolved issue in Moses' household, one that would bring him face to face with the consequences of neglecting a sacred commandment. According to the biblical account, God sought to kill Moses during this journey. The reason? Moses had failed to circumcise his son, a requirement of the covenant between God and Abraham. Circumcision was more than just a ritual. It was a sign of belonging to God's chosen people. By neglecting this act, Moses had inadvertently placed himself and his family outside the fullness of the covenant. It was a serious oversight, one that could not be ignored, even for someone as significant as Moses. In this moment of crisis, it was Zipporah who took decisive action. With urgency and courage, she performed the circumcision herself, cutting off her son's foreskin and touching Moses' feet with it. Her words, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," reflect both her distress and her acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. Through her quick thinking, Zipporah saved Moses' life and restored their family's standing before God. This incident raises several thought-provoking questions. Why did Moses, a man chosen by God for such a monumental task, fail to fulfill this fundamental requirement? Was it an oversight born of complacency, or perhaps a reflection of his dual identity as both a Hebrew and a Midianite? After all, Moses had spent decades living among the Midianites, a culture that may not have shared the same emphasis on circumcision. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that Moses' failure put his entire mission and his life at risk. It serves as a sobering reminder that even those called to great purposes are not exempt from the need for personal obedience. Zipporah's role in this episode cannot be overstated. She emerges as a figure of strength and resourcefulness, stepping into a moment of crisis with clarity and resolve. Her actions not only saved Moses, but also underscored the importance of faithfulness to God's commands. For Gershom and Eleazar, this event would have been deeply formative. Imagine the impact of witnessing their mother take such drastic measures to protect their father and uphold their family's covenant with God. It was a lesson in the non-negotiable nature of obedience and the lengths to which one must go to remain aligned with divine will. The circumcision incident also highlights the interconnectedness of family and faith. Moses' failure wasn't just a personal matter. It affected his entire household. It reminds us that our choices, whether acts of obedience or moments of neglect, have ripple effects that touch those closest to us. For Gershom and Eleazar, this event likely shaped their understanding of God's expectations and the importance of adhering to His covenant. It reinforced the idea that faithfulness isn't optional. It's essential for maintaining a relationship with the divine. Furthermore, this moment underscores the broader theme of sacrifice in service to God. Zipporah's willingness to perform the circumcision, despite the pain and discomfort it must have caused, reflects the kind of selflessness required in fulfilling God's purposes. It's a powerful illustration of how faith often demands difficult decisions and unwavering commitment. For Moses, this incident served as a wake-up call, reminding him that his role as a leader didn't absolve him of his responsibilities as a husband and father. Even as he prepared to lead an entire nation, he couldn't neglect the spiritual well-being of his own family. As we reflect on this episode, let us consider its relevance to our own lives. Are there areas where we've fallen short of God's expectations, whether out of oversight, fear, or complacency? What sacrifices are we willing to make to align ourselves with His purposes? The story of the circumcision incident challenges us to examine our priorities and ensure that we are living in full obedience to the callings placed upon us. In the end, this moment wasn't just about Moses or Zipporah. It was about the legacy they were building for their sons. Gershom and Eleazar grew up in a household where faithfulness to God was non-negotiable, where even the hardest choices were made in service to a higher purpose. Their lives remind us that true greatness isn't defined by the absence of mistakes, but by the willingness to correct them and move forward in obedience. And so, as we continue to explore their story, let us carry this lesson with us. Faithfulness, no matter how small or unseen, has the power to shape destinies and leave a lasting impact on generations to come. The question of why Gershom and Eleazar were not in the spotlight during the Exodus narrative is one that invites us to explore deeper truths about divine purpose, human roles, and the multifaceted ways God works through His people. While their father, Moses, stood at the forefront of history, leading millions, performing miracles, and speaking directly with God, their lives remained largely behind the scenes. This absence from the limelight might seem puzzling at first glance, but it reveals profound lessons about humility, service, and the diverse callings God assigns to different individuals. To understand why Gershom and Eleazar didn't take on leadership roles like Aaron's sons, we must first consider the broader theological framework of the Bible. From the very beginning, God established specific purposes for specific families and tribes within Israel. For instance, Aaron and his descendants were chosen to serve as priests, a lineage entrusted with maintaining the tabernacle, offering sacrifices, and mediating between God and the people. This was not merely a matter of favoritism, it was part of God's sovereign design. The priesthood required a unique set of responsibilities, rituals, and qualifications, all of which were tied to Aaron's family line. In contrast, Moses' sons were not designated for this role. Instead, they were called to a quieter, yet equally vital, form of service. This distinction highlights an important principle. God does not call everyone to the same task. Some are chosen to lead nations, while others are called to support, encourage, and contribute in less visible ways. Gershom and Eleazar's roles may not have been as glamorous or high-profile as those of Aaron's sons, but they were no less significant in the grand tapestry of God's plan. Their legacy reminds us that faithfulness isn't measured by the prominence of our position, but by the sincerity with which we fulfill our calling. But let's delve even deeper into why Gershom and Eleazar weren't thrust into leadership positions. One possible explanation lies in the nature of Moses' mission itself. Moses was uniquely chosen by God to confront Pharaoh, deliver the Ten Commandments, and shepherd the Israelites through the wilderness. His role demanded unparalleled visibility, authority, and spiritual intimacy with God. To place his sons in similar positions of leadership might have risked overshadowing Moses' singular mission or creating confusion about the source of his authority. By keeping Gershom and Eleazar in supportive roles, God ensured that the focus remained squarely on his divine plan, rather than on any potential dynastic ambitions. Moreover, this arrangement reflects a timeless truth about generational legacies. Not every child is called to follow directly in their parents' footsteps. Sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give their children is the freedom to discover their own path, one that aligns with God's purposes rather than societal expectations. Gershom and Eleazar were not burdened with the pressure of living up to their father's extraordinary legacy. Instead, they were given the opportunity to serve faithfully in their own right, contributing to the spiritual and communal life of Israel without the weight of comparison. Their story also challenges us to rethink our assumptions about success and recognition. In a world obsessed with fame and achievement, it's easy to equate significance with visibility. But Gershom's and Eleazar's lives remind us that true greatness often lies in the unseen. They didn't perform miracles or deliver speeches, but their quiet obedience and steadfastness played a crucial role in sustaining the community around them. Their example encourages us to value faithfulness over applause, humility over status, and service over self-promotion. Furthermore, their absence from leadership roles underscores the importance of trust in God's wisdom. Imagine how difficult it might have been for Gershom and Eleazar to grow up knowing that their uncle Aaron's sons were destined for priesthood, while they themselves were not. Did they ever feel overlooked or undervalued? Scripture doesn't provide explicit answers, but we can infer that their lives were shaped by a profound sense of trust in God's plan. They embraced their roles, not with resentment or bitterness, but with humility and grace. This is a powerful reminder that our worth is not determined by the roles we play, but by the love and faithfulness with which we live. As we reflect on Gershom and Eleazar's place in the biblical narrative, let us ask ourselves, are we willing to serve faithfully, even when our contributions go unnoticed? Do we trust God enough to accept the roles He has assigned to us, whether they bring glory or obscurity? Their story teaches us that every person has a part to play in God's story, and sometimes the most enduring legacies are built not through grand gestures, but through quiet devotion. In the end, Gershom and Eleazar's legacy is a testament to the beauty of serving in the background. They remind us that greatness isn't defined by the size of our platform, but by the depth of our commitment. And so, as we continue to explore their journey, let us carry this lesson with us. Faithfulness, even in the smallest of roles, has the power to shape destinies and leave a lasting impact on generations to come. Though Gershom and Eleazar may not have been priests or leaders in the traditional sense, their legacy was far from insignificant. Their descendants played a vital role within the Levite tribe, contributing to the spiritual and communal life of Israel in ways that were both meaningful and enduring. This chapter of their story reminds us that even those who seem to occupy quieter roles can leave an indelible mark on history, a mark that extends far beyond their immediate lifetimes. To understand the significance of Gershom and Eleazar's lineage, we must first examine the broader context of the Levites' role in Israel. After the Exodus, God set apart the tribe of Levi for special service. Unlike the other tribes, who were given portions of land as inheritance, the Levites were scattered throughout Israel to serve as caretakers of the tabernacle and later the temple. They were responsible for maintaining the sacred spaces, performing rituals, and teaching the people about God's laws. While Aaron's descendants were designated as priests, the rest of the Levites supported them in these duties, ensuring that worship and spiritual life remained central to the nation's identity. Gershom and Eleazar's descendants became part of this larger Levitical system, serving in capacities that, while less visible than priesthood, were essential to its functioning. For example, some of their descendants were tasked with transporting the tabernacle and its furnishings during Israel's journeys through the wilderness. Others assisted in the preparation of sacrifices, the guarding of holy spaces, and the instruction of the people in matters of faith. These responsibilities may not have carried the prestige of priestly office, but they were indispensable to the spiritual health of the community. Without the faithful service of the Levites, including the families of Gershom and Eleazar, the covenant between God and Israel could not have been sustained. One particularly fascinating aspect of their legacy is how it unfolded over generations. The Bible provides glimpses into the lives of Gershom's descendants, revealing a lineage that continued to shape Israel's history long after Moses' time. For instance, one notable figure from Gershom's line was Jonathan, who became a priest for the tribe of Dan during the period of the Judges. Though his story is complex and raises questions about the proper use of authority, it demonstrates the lasting influence of Gershom's family. Similarly, Eleazar's descendants maintained ties to the Levitical priesthood, contributing to the preservation of Israel's spiritual traditions. Together, these families ensured that the values of faithfulness, obedience, and service passed down from their ancestors remained alive in the collective memory of the nation. What makes this legacy so compelling is its quiet persistence. Unlike the dramatic exploits of kings or warriors, the contributions of Gershom and Eleazar's descendants often went unnoticed by the wider world. Yet, their work was foundational to the survival of Israel as a covenant people. It's a powerful reminder that true greatness isn't always accompanied by fanfare. Sometimes, the most impactful legacies are built brick by brick, generation by generation, through acts of steadfast devotion. This brings us to a deeper reflection on the nature of legacy itself. What does it mean to leave something behind that truly matters? For Gershom and Eleazar, their legacy wasn't defined by personal achievements or public recognition. Instead, it was rooted in their commitment to serving faithfully within the framework of God's plan. Their descendants carried forward this spirit of humility and dedication, ensuring that their family's contributions, though subtle, were woven into the fabric of Israel's story. Their example challenges us to think differently about our own legacies. In a culture that often equates success with visibility, their lives remind us that lasting impact is rarely achieved through grand gestures alone. More often, it comes through consistent, heartfelt service, through showing up day after day, fulfilling our responsibilities with integrity, and trusting that our efforts will bear fruit in ways we may never fully see. Moreover, their story underscores the importance of community in building a meaningful legacy. Gershom and Eleazar's descendants didn't operate in isolation. They were part of a larger network of Levites working together to uphold Israel's covenant with God. This collaborative effort highlights the truth that no one builds a legacy entirely on their own. We are all connected, and our contributions, no matter how small, are amplified when they align with a greater purpose. As we reflect on the legacy of Gershom and Eleazar, let us consider the ways in which we, too, can leave a lasting impact. Are we investing in relationships, communities, and causes that will outlive us? Are we teaching the next generation the values of faithfulness, humility, and service? And are we willing to embrace roles that may seem ordinary, knowing that even the smallest acts of obedience can ripple through time? In the end, Gershom and Eleazar's story teaches us that legacy isn't about fame or accolades. It's about faithfulness. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when no one is watching. And it's about trusting that God can take our quiet, unseen efforts and use them to build something extraordinary. So, as we continue to explore their journey, let us ask ourselves, how can we live today in a way that leaves a tomorrow worth remembering? Because in the end, it's not the size of our role that defines us. It's the love and integrity with which we fulfill it. The story of Gershom and Eleazar is not just a historical account. It is a profound lesson on service, humility, and the quiet strength of faithfulness. Their lives remind us that greatness is not always defined by the spotlight, but by the sincerity with which we fulfill our roles, no matter how small or unseen they may seem. As we reflect on their legacy, let us delve deeper into the timeless truths their story reveals and consider how these lessons can transform the way we live, serve, and relate to one another. One of the most striking aspects of Gershom and Eleazar's narrative is the emphasis on humility. In a world that often celebrates visibility and recognition, their lives challenge us to rethink what it means to lead a meaningful existence. They were the sons of Moses, one of the greatest leaders in history, yet they did not seek fame or position. Instead, they embraced their roles quietly, contributing to the spiritual and communal life of Israel without demanding attention or applause. This kind of humility is rare and deeply countercultural. It requires an inner security, a confidence that our worth is not tied to external validation, but to the faithfulness with which we serve. Their example invites us to ask ourselves, are we willing to step back and let others shine when necessary? Can we find contentment in serving faithfully, even if our efforts go unnoticed? Humility, however, is only part of the equation. Equally important is the lesson of obedience. Gershom and Eleazar's lives were shaped by their father's unwavering commitment to God's commands, as well as their mother Zipporah's decisive act of obedience during the circumcision incident. These moments underscore the importance of aligning our lives with divine purpose, even when it requires sacrifice or discomfort. Obedience is not always easy. It often demands that we set aside our preferences, confront our fears, and trust in God's wisdom. Yet, it is through obedience that we discover true freedom, the freedom to become who we were created to be. Gershom and Eleazar's legacy reminds us that obedience is not merely about following rules. It is about cultivating a heart that seeks to honor God in all things. Their story also teaches us about the power of faithfulness. Faithfulness is not a grand gesture. It is a daily choice to show up, to do what needs to be done, and to persevere even when the work feels mundane or thankless. Gershom and Eleazar's descendants carried this spirit of faithfulness into future generations, ensuring that their family's contributions remained vital to the spiritual life of Israel. This challenges us to think about the ways we approach our own responsibilities. Are we committed to excellence in the tasks entrusted to us, whether big or small? Do we see our work as an opportunity to glorify God, regardless of its perceived significance? Faithfulness, though quiet, has the power to shape destinies and leave a lasting impact. Another profound takeaway from their story is the interconnectedness of community. Gershom and Eleazar's descendants served within the Levitical system, working alongside others to uphold Israel's covenant with God. This collaborative effort highlights the truth that no one builds a legacy entirely on their own. We are all part of something greater than ourselves, and our contributions, no matter how modest, are amplified when they align with a shared purpose. Their example encourages us to invest in relationships, mentor the next generation, and support one another in fulfilling our callings. After all, the most enduring legacies are often those built together, brick by brick, through acts of love and service. Finally, their story inspires us to embrace a long-term perspective. The impact of Gershom and Eleazar's lives was not fully realized in their own lifetimes, but unfolded over generations. This reminds us that true success cannot always be measured by immediate results. Sometimes, the seeds we plant today will bear fruit long after we are gone. This calls for patience, perseverance, and a willingness to trust in God's timing. It also challenges us to think beyond ourselves, to consider how our choices and actions might affect those who come after us. As we conclude this exploration of Gershom and Eleazar's legacy, let us take these lessons to heart. Let us strive to live with humility, embracing roles that may seem ordinary, yet are vital to God's purposes. Let us commit to obedience, trusting that God's commands are always for our good and His glory. Let us cultivate faithfulness, knowing that even the smallest acts of service can have far-reaching effects. And let us invest in community, recognizing that our individual contributions are part of a larger story. So, I leave you with this challenge. How will you choose to serve today? Will you seek recognition, or will you embrace the beauty of faithfulness in the background? Remember, every act of love, every moment of obedience, and every decision to serve with integrity adds to a legacy that transcends time. Gershom and Eleazar's story reminds us that even unnoticed contributions can leave an indelible mark on the world. Let us live with that truth in mind, trusting that God can use our quiet faithfulness to accomplish extraordinary things. As we reflect on the story of Moses' sons, Gershom and Eleazar, it's hard not to feel a sense of quiet admiration for their lives. Their story isn't one of grandeur or fame, but of humility and service. It challenges us to rethink what it means to live a meaningful life. In a world that often celebrates visibility and recognition, their legacy reminds us that true significance isn't always tied to the spotlight. Sometimes, the most profound contributions are made in the background, unseen but deeply felt. For me, this story evokes a personal reflection on how we measure success and purpose. How often do we chase recognition, only to miss the beauty of serving faithfully where we are? Gershom and Eleazar didn't lead armies,